It was snowing sideways when Jonas Callan pulled the reins and stopped the wagon just outside the town square. His boy, Micah, sat bundled in the front seat beside him, a threadbare scarf wrapped twice around his face. His feet barely touched the edge of the wagon board, but he sat upright, alert. He always did when they reached a new town. At only 6 years old, Micah had learned to read landscapes the way other children read storybooks. "Want to wait here?" Jonas asked, not expecting an answer. Micah simply shook his head and climbed down after him. They weren't supposed to stop here. Appaloosa Bend wasn't on the map Jonas carried, but the wagon wheel had cracked 6 miles back, and this was the nearest sign of roofs and walls. He figured he'd trade a few tools, maybe fix the wheel and move on. But as they stepped closer to the square, Jonas stopped cold. People were gathered not in celebration, not for a fair, but standing still in tight coats and tighter expressions. The kind of quiet that made the cold bite deeper. At the center stood a wooden platform, a gallows, and a rope. Jonas tightened his jaw. He hadn't seen one of those in years. Not since the war, not since everything that came after. A woman stood beneath the noose, barefoot, hair falling in limp curls over her face. Her hands were bound behind her. Her dress was torn at the hem, one sleeve missing entirely, but she stood straight, not pleading, not sobbing. At her feet was something that made Jonas's gut twist. A wicker basket, not for laundry or bread, but holding 5 children, the smallest no older than 3. They huddled together, eyes wide, arms around each other like animals in a storm. No guards held them in place. They didn't need to. They weren't going anywhere. Micah tugged at Jonas's coat. "Why is she up there?" Jonas didn't answer. He didn't know. A man in a long overcoat stepped up to the platform. Sheriff, by the way the crowd shifted when he cleared his throat. "This woman," he called, "has stolen from 3 shops in this town. She's lied, she's run, she's refused to name a husband or kin. This is her 2nd arrest in as many winters. She leaves children unattended. She's unfit to raise them and unfit to stay among us." Murmurs in the crowd, not loud, not angry, just enough to confirm the weight of slancy. Jonas didn't move. "She took bread," a voice from the back called. "Bread," the sheriff repeated, "and root vegetables and blankets. The law is not about pity. The law is about order." Micah's fingers found Jonas's again, cold, still. Then the sheriff turned. He nodded to someone behind the platform, and the rope tightened. The woman shifted, not fear, not fight, just a slow exhale like she'd been holding her breath for years. Jonas took 1 step forward, then another. No one stopped him. He didn't raise his voice, didn't wave his arms. He just said 1 sentence. "I'll serve her sentence." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The rope paused. The sheriff turned, eyes narrowing. "You what?" "I'll serve her sentence," Jonas said again, louder this time. "You want debt paid? I've got 2 hands. I'll work until whatever she owes is repaid. Just let her go." Laughter flickered on the edges of the crowd. Not cruel, just unsure. "Why would you do that?" the sheriff asked, arms folded. Jonas looked at the children. The smallest one was now staring at him, her eyes dark and glassy but not empty. "I don't know," Jonas said quietly, "but I'm still saying it." And that was the moment the youngest child, barely a toddler, stood up in the basket, one hand clinging to the woman's torn skirt, the other reaching out, not to her mother, to Jonas. He didn't move. But something inside him did. The platform groaned under the woman's bare feet as she shifted her weight. The noose was still tight but hadn't yet been drawn. The sheriff's hand hovered by his coat pocket where he'd tucked away the paper authorizing the hanging. "I said," Jonas called again, "I'll serve her sentence. You want justice. I'll give you labor." The sheriff raised a brow. "You think this is barter? You walk into our town, stranger, no name, no standing, and offer what, exactly?" Jonas's voice stayed steady. 3 months' work, 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. You pick the task, I won't argue. The sheriff glanced toward the mayor, who stood near the church steps. Old man, stern face, gloves too clean for real work. This isn't a farmhand dispute, the mayor muttered. She stole food, Jonas replied, loud enough for all to hear. You're about to orphan 5 children over a loaf of rye and some turnips. He turned to the crowd. Is that who you are? Is that what this town became while no one was watching? The wind shifted. One of the townsfolk coughed. Another looked away. The sheriff hesitated. You know what you're asking for? I know what I'm offering. The woman on the gallows turned her head slightly. It was the first movement she'd made since Jonas had stepped forward. Her eyes weren't grateful. They weren't pleading. They were tired, like someone who didn't believe in rescue anymore. Jonas didn't blame her. He didn't believe in rescue either. But here he was. What's your name? The sheriff finally asked. Jonas Callan. You got any history? Army blacksmith, post-war mechanic, no arrests, no debts, no kin. The mayor cleared his throat. No kin? Widower. My son's with me. Micah. He's 6. That gave the sheriff pause. You bring a boy into this? Jonas glanced down. Micah stood several feet back, gripping the wagon post. He didn't look scared, just watchful. Like he'd already seen too much for his age. I teach him by example, Jonas said. You decide if this is one worth teaching. The woman blinked, just once. Then she said, without raising her voice, I don't want his charity. Jonas turned to her. I'm not offering charity. Then why? He didn't answer right away, then simply, because no one did this for me, and I remember what that felt like. The wind carried the words farther than his breath ever could. The sheriff looked at the mayor again. No one said a word. A murmur rose in the crowd, not resistance, not outrage, just the sound of something breaking loose. Something long-rusted finally shifting. Then, let the man do it, someone called. He ain't wrong, another added. Better sweat than death. The mayor clenched his jaw, but he nodded. The sheriff sighed, stepped forward, and raised his hand. Cut her down. The rope was sliced. The woman collapsed to her knees, not from weakness, but from shock. Her hands still bound behind her, she gasped once, sharp and ugly, like a person drowning on dry land. Jonas walked toward her slowly. He didn't offer his hand. He knew better. He just stood nearby, giving her space to stand on her own terms. Eventually, she did. The children were let down from the basket, quiet and wide-eyed. The oldest, maybe 11, rushed to her mother, followed by the rest like a trail of ducklings. They didn't cry. They didn't speak. They simply wrapped around her legs like she was the only thing left that mattered. Jonas stepped back. You just bought yourself a pile of work, the sheriff muttered to him. Good, Jonas said. Been too long since I earned something honest. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. You know we'll hold you to this. I wouldn't want it any other way. He turned to gather his son and climb back into the wagon. Before he did, he looked one last time at the woman. She hadn't said thank you. She hadn't needed to. But the smallest child, barefoot, dirt-streaked, reached out again. The same way she had before, this time Jonas bent down and let her touch his gnarled, calloused fingers just once. Then he climbed onto the wagon and took the reins. The town didn't applaud, but they didn't stop him either. And as he drove away with the woman and 5 children following behind on foot, no one quite knew what to make of the man who traded sweat for salvation. The ride out of town was slow. The snow had turned to sleet, and the wagon wheels sank into the soft earth like it, too, resisted where they were going. Jonas didn't speak. Neither did the woman. She sat in the back of the wagon, arms around her children, wrapped in a threadbare blanket someone had thrown in out of pity or guilt. The oldest girl held the youngest in her lap, their faces buried in each other's coats. Jonas stole a glance through the wagon's side mirror. Not to stare, just to make sure she was still there. She was. Silent but not broken. Or maybe she was both. Micah sat beside him, fidgeting with the hem of his coat. His legs didn't reach the wagon floor. He kept looking back, then forward, then back again. "You okay?" Jonas finally asked. Micah nodded. "Cold?" "No." Pause. "She didn't say thank you." Jonas almost smiled. "She doesn't have to," he said. "Why not?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the road, such as it was, a muddy path winding between pine trees half covered in slush. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "people carry too much to speak. That doesn't mean they're ungrateful. Just means they're still bleeding." Micah didn't ask more after that. By the time they reached the cabin, the sky was already dimming. Jonas had built it himself years ago, back when his wife was still alive. A single room with a loft, a small shed out back, and a roof that creaked in the wind. He hadn't had visitors in a long time, not the kind that stayed. Jonas pulled the wagon to a stop, stepped down and offered his hand. Not to the woman, but to the children. They hesitated, except the smallest one. She reached for him again, same as she had in the square. Tiny fingers, grimy nails, a wrist no thicker than a twig. Jonas lifted her gently and set her down beside the wagon. She didn't let go of his sleeve, not even when her mother stepped down next. The woman stood still for a long moment, looking at the house, at the land, at him. Jonas didn't meet her eyes. "This is what I've got," he said simply. "It isn't much, but the roof holds." She didn't reply. He gestured toward the door. "You'll sleep upstairs with the girls. There's a stove. Water's from the pump. No locks on anything." Still nothing. He nodded once and started toward the shed. He had firewood to check. As he passed, the woman finally spoke. Her voice was dry but clear. "What do you want in return?" Jonas didn't stop walking. "I want to go to bed tonight knowing 6 people aren't sleeping cold," he said. "That's all." He disappeared into the dark, leaving behind a woman with nothing but 5 children, a stranger's roof, and a silence she didn't know what to do with. Inside, she helped the children out of their damp coats. She rubbed their hands near the stove. She didn't touch the blankets folded near the wall. The smallest one, the one who'd grabbed Jonas's sleeve, sat down beside the fire and stared at the door like she expected him to come back. Then very slowly she curled up on the rug and pulled Jonas's old glove from her pocket. How she'd gotten it, no one saw, but she held it tight, like a keepsake, and slept. The cabin wasn't meant for guests. It barely held Jonas and Micah on quiet nights, with snow piled high against the window panes and wind howling through the eaves like a dog that forgot its home. Now there were 7. Jonas opened the front door without flourish. The hinges creaked the same way they always did. Inside, the room smelled of pine ash, iron, and old boots. It was clean but not cozy. He stood to the side, letting the woman and her children enter first. She stepped in cautiously, her eyes darting to the stove, the rafters, the pile of firewood stacked near the hearth. Then, without a word, she guided her daughters inside. The youngest still clung to Jonas's glove like it was stitched from hope itself. Micah waited by the table, watching them. His boots dripped melting sleet onto the floorboards. The woman hesitated near the doorframe. "This was your wife's home." Jonas nodded. "Ours, before the war." She looked down. "And now? Now it's mine. And for now, yours too." She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. He moved toward the back wall and opened a small storage hatch, pulling out a stack of folded quilts. "Loft upstairs," he said. It's not big, but it's warm. Kids can sleep together. You'll fit if you don't mind tight corners." She didn't respond. The girls wandered quietly. The second oldest found a broom in the corner and started sweeping without being asked. Another knelt to untangle a rug that had curled at the edge. They weren't shy. They were used to fixing things they didn't break. Jonas opened the narrow cupboard above the stove and pulled out a few jars, beans, salt, half a loaf of hard bread. He set them down without looking at anyone. The woman glanced at the jars. "Is this all you have?" "For now." She nodded once. Then softly, "We've lived on less." Jonas placed a pot on the stove, poured in water from a tin jug, and began lighting the fire. He worked slowly, like every movement mattered, because it did. In silence, he took a second chair from the corner and placed it at the table. It didn't match the others. Its leg was cracked and mended with wire, but it stood. The children sat on the floor near the stove, huddled together under one of the quilts. The middle girl, freckled nose, sharp eyes, whispered something that made the others giggle. Even the youngest smiled. Jonas didn't smile, but his shoulders dropped half an inch. A small piece. The woman remained standing. "You don't have to do more," Jonas said quietly. "I'm not used to being in someone else's home. It's not a debt." Her voice was flat. "Everything is." He didn't argue. He handed her a mug. She didn't take it, but she didn't walk away either. They stood like that a moment too long. Two people who didn't know where to place their hands or how to measure silence that wasn't cold. Eventually she sat, not on the chair, on the floor beside her children. Jonas returned to the counter. He started slicing what little bread remained into 7 even pieces. No one spoke again that night. When the food was ready, they passed it hand to hand. Small palms, thin fingers, eyes lowered not in shame but habit. They chewed slowly. No one asked for more. Micah offered the last crust to the youngest girl. She gave him Jonas's glove in return. Micah blinked, then tucked it into his pocket without a word. Later, Jonas climbed the ladder to the loft to check the blankets. He found 6 bodies tucked close like puzzle pieces that didn't need to fit perfectly to belong. He turned away without a sound. Downstairs, he pulled out a pillow and settled onto the wooden bench by the window. Micah joined him, curling under his arm. Jonas looked at the fire, now dimming to ember. "Big day," he whispered. Micah didn't reply. He was already asleep. Outside, the wind had softened. The sleet stopped, and inside, for the first time in a long while, the cabin felt full. Not fixed, not healed, but full. The next morning, Mira was already at the stove when Jonas came in from checking the traps. Her back was to him, shoulders hunched slightly, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She moved with efficiency, no wasted motion, no hesitation, but not like she belonged there. More like someone borrowing time. The cabin smelled faintly of broth, not meat, just hot water, salt, and a pinch of dried onion. The girls were still asleep upstairs. The house was too quiet for that many feet. Jonas placed the small catch of rabbits too, barely enough to matter, on the counter, and didn't say anything. Neither did she. They worked around each other like strangers at a bus stop. Careful not to touch. Careful not to block. Micah entered, rubbing his eyes. He reached for the firewood basket and began stacking kindling like he'd done it forever. Mira noticed but said nothing. He was her son, but not her responsibility. Jonas poured water into the basin to wash his hands. The pump creaked outside, echoing through the pipes. He glanced at Mira's hands. Red, cracked. A burn near the knuckle wrapped in a torn strip of fabric. "You should use the salve," he said. "I'm fine." "It'll get worse." She turned slowly. Her eyes didn't carry anger, just the sharp edge of someone who spent years defending herself. I said I'm fine. Jonas nodded, said no more. Micah slid a tin cup across the table toward her. Water. She didn't touch it. But when he wasn't looking, she drank. Outside, the snow was melting into patches of brown and gray. The roof dripped steadily onto the porch. The woodpile leaned sideways. Jonas stepped out to chop more firewood. The axe thunked rhythmically solid, practiced. Not furious, not cathartic, just necessary. Mira watched from the window. She didn't mean to, but her eyes stayed there longer than intended. The way he moved, the way he shifted his weight, the way he looked over his shoulder between swings, not at her, but at the cabin, at the roof, at the smoke, at Micah. He wasn't checking for danger. He was checking that it all still held. She turned away before he looked up. Later, as the children awoke, Mira guided them through simple routines. One brushed hair, one folded blankets. The youngest spilled a tin of buttons and quietly picked them up again. No one cried. No one needed to be told what to do. Jonas returned with a basket of split logs. He didn't announce himself. Just set them near the fire, brushed the sawdust from his palms, and moved to the other side of the room. He saw one of the girls reach for the broom. He stopped her with a gentle hand. "You're a guest," he said. She looked confused. "We don't sweep?" Jonas hesitated, then, "You can, but only if you want to, not because you feel like you have to." The girl looked to Mira for confirmation. Mira gave none. Later that afternoon, Mira stepped out to fetch water. Jonas watched her from the barn. She didn't ask for help. He didn't offer it. But when she slipped slightly on the iced porch step, he moved instinctively half a step forward, then caught himself. She straightened, looked over her shoulder. Their eyes met, for just a breath. Then she looked away again. Inside, one of the girls started humming, a tune with no words. Micah hummed back, picking up the melody. Jonas heard it. So did Mira. Neither of them smiled, but neither of them stopped it. That night, the wind picked up again. Not loud, not violent, just enough to stir the eaves and make the windows rattle slightly in their frames. Jonas fed the stove and kept the flame low. He didn't like sleeping in heat. Too much warmth made him restless. But tonight, he laid out an extra log before retreating to his bench by the window. Up in the loft, the children shuffled into place like birds on a branch, limbs tangled, heads tucked. Micah climbed the ladder halfway and looked over the edge. Then he climbed back down. Jonas raised a brow. "They don't have enough covers," Micah said simply. "There are 6 quilts. One's damp. It smells. Clara's shivering." Jonas paused, then nodded. Micah didn't wait for permission. He pulled his own blanket from the foot of the bench, folded it, and carried it upstairs. He didn't say anything when he handed it to Clara. And she didn't thank him. But she held it like a treasure. When Micah returned, Jonas simply said, "Good call." Micah sat beside him and leaned in. "She talks in her sleep," he whispered. "Clara?" "Yeah, says names I don't know. Maybe they're from before." Jonas didn't reply. Later, as the house settled, one of the girls kicked off her shoe and let it roll halfway down the loft ladder. It landed with a soft thump near the fireplace and stayed there. No one came down for it. In the morning, it was still there. Jonas picked it up and examined the wear threadbare heel, laces knotted tight from too many reties. He placed it gently by the wall, next to the row of boots. It didn't match any of the others, but now it belonged there. Mira didn't come downstairs until the stove was already lit and a pot of oats was starting to simmer. Jonas had beaten her to it, not by intention, just by habit. She paused when she saw him at the stove. "You didn't have to." "I was up," he said. She said nothing but began sorting through the clean tin bowls stacked by the counter. "I can find another room," she said eventually. "Soon. You don't have to keep us. Jonas stirred the oats without looking up. No one's asking you to leave. Still, you didn't sign up for this. He turned toward her, his face unreadable. I did, actually. At the square in front of 100 people. That was for one life. And this is what came with it. Mira set down the bowls. Don't make it sound noble, she said. You didn't even know us. I didn't need to. She looked like she was about to respond. Something sharp, maybe, but then one of the girls ran down the ladder barefoot, hair wild and eyes wide. Micah, let me use his blanket, she shouted. Behind her, Micah stumbled down slower, clearly less excited by the attention. Mira looked between them. Clara beamed. Did you say thank you? Mira asked. The girl hesitated. I think I did. Inside my head. Micah shrugged. I heard it. And just like that, the moment passed. Jonas ladled oatmeal into the bowls. Mira sliced a bruised apple and divided it 6 ways. They ate standing up. No one rushed. Afterward, Jonas noticed the single shoe still placed neatly by the wall. He didn't move it. Later that day, when the sun came through the small eastern window, Micah placed a cup on the sill, an old tin one, with a crack in its side. He filled it with snow and a twig. What's that for? Jonas asked. It's a decoration, Micah said, to make it not look like only boys live here. Jonas said nothing, but after lunch he moved the cup slightly to center it with the window. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, Mira came down for water. Jonas was on the bench again, staring at the fire. She didn't speak. But on her way back up the ladder, she paused, looked at him, and gave the smallest nod. Not a thank you, not even quite acknowledgement, but something closer to, I see you. Jonas didn't return the nod. He didn't have to. The house was already starting to breathe differently. Mid-morning brought quiet sun, the kind that warms the floorboards but doesn't reach your bones. The children were outside picking up fallen pine cones and piling them like treasure behind the woodpile. The snow had started to pull back, leaving behind patches of wet ground and winter-browned grass inside. Mira sat near the fire, a tattered coat spread across her lap. It was the oldest girl's, torn clean along the left shoulder where the fabric had thinned from too many winters. Her needle moved with precision. No wasted thread. Her hands steady but not fast. She'd done this before many times. Micah watched from the corner of the room, sitting cross-legged with a small wooden toy in his hands. It was nothing special, a block with holes drilled through it and a string knotted at one end. He hadn't spoken in 15 minutes. Then, you know, my mom used to fix my socks. Mira didn't look up. He stood, walked across the room and knelt beside the bench. From beneath it, he pulled out a small, rusted tin box. Here, he said. Mira glanced down. It was dented and old, the kind of thing most people would toss. But inside was a scattering of needles, a spool of navy thread, 2 mismatched buttons, and a thimble that had seen better years. She hesitated. Jonas said it was hers, Micah added. Still, Mira didn't reach for it. Micah opened the lid anyway and placed it on the floor beside her. Then he returned to his corner as if nothing had happened. The fire crackled once, the smell of ash mixed with wool. Mira picked up the thimble. It was too big for her finger and she didn't use it. But she didn't put it back either. Instead, she took the spool of thread newer than the one she had and tied off her stitch with a neater knot than before. From across the room, Micah watched. His toy sat forgotten on the floor. A minute passed. Then another. You sew real good, he said quietly. It's not good, Mira replied. It's just enough. Still better than me. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Behind the cabin, one of the girls squealed with laughter. Mira's shoulders tensed, then relaxed. Micah stood up again, wandered to the window, and looked outside. "They're trying to bury each other in pine needles," he reported. "Is that dangerous?" "No, just itchy." A beat. "Do you want me to tell them to stop?" "No." "Do you want to tell them?" Mira shook her head. "They'll stop when they're cold." Micah looked over at her. "You always know what they'll do." "I've had to." He didn't press her. Instead, he knelt near the fireplace, picked up a dry stick, and pushed at the embers. Jonas entered then, carrying 2 sacks, one with potatoes, one with old tools he'd traded for at a neighboring farm. He took in the scene with a glance. Mira sewing. Micah quiet. The room warm. He set down the sacks and didn't say anything. Mira reached into the sewing tin and placed the thimble back where it belonged. But the spool, she kept that in her pocket, not to steal, just in case. That night, when she finished stitching the last seam, she folded the coat carefully and set it on the step leading to the loft. The oldest girl saw it first. She didn't ask who had fixed it. She already knew. And Mira, watching from the fire, said nothing. But when she turned to reach for her own shawl, she found it gone. In its place, a folded blanket. Micah's. Again. The house was still. Long after the children had gone to sleep, after the fire had settled into low orange hums, after even the wind outside seemed to hush in respect, Jonas sat alone by the stove, his back slightly curved, a single glove in his hands. Not new, not valuable. The stitching had come loose at the thumb, fraying at the edge where he gripped his tools. He worked slowly. No needle cushion, no lamp but firelight. Just a patch of waxed thread and the kind of quiet only people who've known war and winter could stand. He didn't see her approach, didn't hear her on the ladder. But he felt it, an awareness, a shift in the room. He kept sewing. "You're using the wrong thread," Mira said softly behind him. Jonas didn't look up. "It's all I've got." She stepped closer. "The wax will hold, but it'll stiffen." "I don't mind stiff." Another pause. Then she sat down, not beside him, not across, just near. The kind of near that said, "I'm not ready to talk, but I won't walk away." Jonas kept working. The loop pulled through the leather with a soft hiss. His fingers were large, rough, not made for delicate work, but they moved with care. Mira watched. The fire flickered against the wall. Shadows moved along the ceiling beams like dancers with nowhere to go. "Those were hers," Mira said. Jonas stopped. "Your wife's," she clarified. "The gloves, they're not yours." Jonas turned the glove over in his palm. "No, they're not." He didn't offer more. Mira didn't ask. Silence returned, but this time, it didn't press against them. It rested between them like an old friend, familiar and worn. Jonas finished the seam, tied it off, bit the thread. He flexed the glove once, testing. It held. "Not bad," he murmured. "You missed a stitch at the base," she replied. I was hoping no one would notice." She almost smiled. Almost. Then he turned just slightly and looked at her for the first time that night. "You sleep?" She shook her head. "Too quiet." He nodded. "Takes getting used to." "Sometimes I miss the noise," she said, "even when it was bad." Jonas didn't answer. He folded the gloves and set them on the bench. Mira didn't move. The fire crackled again. A small pop. A fleck of ash rose and danced before falling back into the grate. "You keep everything in its place," she said after a while. "Try to." "Why?" Jonas leaned back against the wall. His voice came slower now. "Because the day I stop noticing where things go, that's the day I stop believing it matters." Mira looked at him, not with sympathy, with understanding. They sat like that for a while longer. No words, just fire and breath and two people too tired to explain who they used to be. Then she stood. "I'll bring you better thread tomorrow." Jonas nodded. She climbed the ladder again, didn't look back. Jonas watched the shadows move across the wall one more time before blowing out the candle. The glove stayed on the bench, but the silence it left behind, it was softer now. The snow had finally melted off the porch roof when the letter arrived. It came by courier, an older man with bad knees and a pack too big for his frame. Jonas met him at the fence, shook his hand, and thanked him for the walk. "No reply needed," the courier said, tapping the envelope twice before heading off again, boots crunching on half-thawed gravel. Jonas turned the letter over in his hand. No return address, no name, just his. To Jonas Callan. Block letters, heavy ink, smeared slightly in the upper corner like whoever wrote it had paused too long. He didn't open it right away. He waited until nightfall. After dinner, after the girls had curled into their blankets, after Micah had fallen asleep tracing stars in the window with a cold finger. Jonas sat by the table and ran a knife slowly through the seal, inside one sheet, handwritten, simple, no greeting, no signature, just a message. "You're housing stolen goods. The woman took what wasn't hers and left what was mine. I'm coming for both. EQ." Jonas didn't move for a long time. The fire beside him crackled, throwing shadows up onto the rafters. Somewhere above, a child coughed in her sleep. Maybe Clara. He read the letter again. Stolen goods. He folded the paper once, then again. He didn't tear it, didn't burn it. He placed it beneath the box of sewing threads on the mantel. Then he walked outside. The cold hit him like memory. He crossed the yard to the shed, opened the door with one shoulder, and stepped inside. It smelled of rust, old rope, and iron tools, a man's space. His only space, if he were honest. He sat on the overturned crate he used as a stool, closed his eyes, and let the name rise. Elias Quinn. He hadn't heard it in years, didn't need to ask who wrote the letter. The initials were enough. He remembered the way Mira's jaw tightened the day she arrived, the way she flinched at loud voices, how her daughters moved through the house like guests afraid to overstay. It all aligned now. He stayed in the shed a while, didn't count minutes, didn't rehearse what to say, just breathed. When he came back inside, Mira was sitting by the fire, alone. She looked up when he entered, but something in her eyes told him she already knew. He didn't speak. She didn't ask. He moved to the stove, added one last log, and nudged the embers to catch. Behind him, her voice came, low and flat. "When? Tonight? From him?" He nodded. She closed her eyes, exhaled through her nose. "I should have left sooner." "You didn't run." "I did," she said. "I just stopped long enough to think it might work this time." Silence stretched again. This one was different. He turned, leaned against the counter, crossed his arms. "You knew he'd look. I hoped he wouldn't care. He cares enough." Mira stood, crossed to the window. Outside, the wind moved through pine like a whisper. "He'll try to take them. I know. Legally. I know." Jonas stepped closer. "I'm not afraid of him," she said. "I believe you. I'm afraid of what they'll think when he shows up smiling." Jonas didn't answer. She looked at him, not pleading, not angry, just tired. "I've built them on truth," she said. "But all he has to do is show up in clean clothes and call himself father, and it'll all start to crack." Jonas took the letter from the mantel, held it out. She didn't touch it. "I've seen worse than letters," she said. "So have I." They stood there, the fire between them. Then Mira said something he didn't expect. "I'm not going anywhere." He blinked. "I thought you would," he said. "I almost did," she admitted. "But running means leaving them behind. I did that once. I won't again." Jonas folded the letter one last time, put it in the drawer beside the dried herbs, and shut it. Mira didn't move, but when he returned to his bench that night, he noticed something folded beside his coat. A set of gloves, restitched at the seams. His, but better. It was Sunday when he came. The cabin was quiet. The sun had pushed back the last of the snow, and spring hovered just beyond the trees, unsure if it should announce itself. Mira was inside, braiding Clara's hair. Micah was gathering kindling. Jonas sat sharpening an axe, not because it needed it, but because idle hands felt dangerous today. The knock came lightly. Not urgent, not loud. 3 soft taps. Jonas froze. Mira didn't. She stood without a word, walked to the window and looked out. Then her breath caught. Jonas saw her hand tighten slightly around the curtain. He rose slowly and joined her. A man stood at the fence. Tall, neat, boots polished, coat pressed. His hair was combed straight back, not a strand out of place. In one hand he held a hat, in the other a thin envelope. He smiled when he saw Mira in the window. That was what made Jonas's stomach turn. Not the letter, not the man, the smile. It was the kind you practiced in a mirror. Mira opened the door before Jonas could say anything. She didn't wave, didn't step forward, just said, "Elias." He bowed his head slightly. "Mira." Jonas came to the doorway. Elias noticed him, paused, then offered a nod. "You must be the blacksmith," he said, "the one who made himself useful." Jonas didn't reply. Elias looked back at Mira. "I didn't come to fight," he said. "I came to speak, like adults." Mira stepped out onto the porch. Jonas stayed behind her. Elias kept his posture easy, like a man about to discuss weather or taxes. "How did you find us?" Mira asked. Elias smiled again. "You taught me how to track, remember? You always were predictable when scared." Her shoulders tensed. Jonas stepped beside her now. Elias's eyes flicked to him. "No need for dramatics. I'm not here to take anyone yet." He held out the envelope. Mira didn't reach for it. Elias sighed. "Look, this isn't personal anymore. It's about what's best for the girls, and you know, deep down, what a court will decide." "Don't," Mira said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't pretend this is about care. It's about legality," Elias said, "and rights and structure." Jonas finally spoke. "You abandoned them." "I released them," Elias corrected. "I made space for her to fail or thrive. She chose survival by theft. That's on her." Jonas stepped down from the porch. "You left 5 children and their mother without food in winter." Elias's jaw clenched. "I left her with dignity. What she did with it isn't my fault." Jonas didn't move. Elias turned back to Mira. "I've already filed in 3 counties. 1 judge will listen. 1 will see the paper trail. You've been arrested twice. You're living in a stranger's home. You have no formal income." He extended the envelope again. Mira took it this time, not to accept it, to keep it from fluttering to the ground. Inside, she knew, would be words dressed up as justice. "Why now?" she asked. Elias looked at the trees. "Because I heard you were settling. And if you're settling, that means the girls are putting down roots, and I can't let them grow in bad soil." Mira's hands trembled, only slightly. "I'll be back in 7 days," Elias said, "with an officer. Not to remove them, just to inspect. You know how these things work." He turned to go, stopped once. "Make sure they're dressed properly next time. We wouldn't want the judge to think you're unfit." Then he walked away, not fast, not slow, like a man who believed time worked in his favor. Jonas didn't speak for a long moment. Mira still stared at the path where Elias had vanished. Then she whispered, "He'll use the law like a knife." Jonas replied, "Then we sharpen truth like a shield." Mira looked down at the envelope. She didn't open it, not yet, but she didn't throw it away either. Because battles like this weren't won by fire. They were survived by staying. The letter sat unopened on the table, a plain white rectangle, almost polite in its stillness. Jonas stood near the stove, drying his hands on a cloth that had no real need for drying. Mira was at the sink, staring through the small window above it. The pine trees outside moved gently. The breeze didn't know anything had changed. "You could take them," Jonas said finally. His voice wasn't cold, just measured. "To where?" "A cabin north of here. Just a day's ride. My cousin keeps it stocked. No one would think to look." Mira didn't turn around. "They'd ask why you left," she said. "Why you ran. They've been through worse." "Yes," she replied, "which is exactly why I'm not teaching them to keep running." Jonas set the cloth down. "He's not bluffing. I know. He'll twist everything. I know that too." They stood there, neither looking at the other. The children were outside again, Micah showing the girls how to skip stones across the shallow creek bed. Their voices carried into the house like echoes from another life. Mira turned finally. Her eyes weren't red. They were dry. Too dry. "I've built so much out of silence," she said. "Not lying, just leaving things out. I told them he left. I didn't say what he took with him." Jonas didn't interrupt. "I didn't want them to grow up angry," she added. "Now I don't know if I did the right thing." "You did what you could," she smiled, a quiet, tired kind of smile. "That's what people always say when they don't have to live with the result." Jonas crossed the room and picked up the envelope. He weighed it in his hand like it might change form if he held it long enough. "Do you want me to read it?" "No." "Do you want to?" "Not yet." He set it back down. Mira walked over and pulled a blanket from the chair, folded it, unfolded it again. Her fingers needed something to do. "He used to quote scripture," she said. "Always the ones about order, about obedience, never the ones about grace." Jonas nodded once. "Control likes to dress up as virtue." That got a small breath from her. Almost a laugh, but not quite. "I know running makes sense," she said after a while. "It would be safer, smarter. But what if just once they saw me stay? They'd remember. They'd also remember if it all goes wrong." Jonas didn't try to reassure her. He knew better. He stepped closer. "You're not alone," he said. She looked up at him. Not for comfort, for confirmation. "You don't owe me this," she said. "I know." "Then why?" He paused. "Because I've lived long enough to know the difference between what's safe and what's right." Mira closed her eyes. The silence returned, but it was different now. Not thick with avoidance, just full. He moved back toward the fire. She returned to the sink. Outside, Clara's laugh rang out, then Micah's, and for a moment neither of them moved, as if the sound itself was fragile and breathing might break it. The night didn't feel like night. There were stars, sure, a quiet breeze, even the faint hoot of an owl somewhere beyond the trees, but in the cabin it felt like something was holding its breath. Jonas sat by the stove, boots off, hands resting on his knees. Mira moved slowly. She reached for the tin box beneath the stairs. Not the one with thread, the other, dented, copper-latched, its corners worn soft with age. She carried it to the table, set it down, didn't open it yet. Jonas didn't ask. "I never wrote to remember," she said softly. "Only to survive the days I thought I wouldn't." Jonas nodded. Mira opened the box and took out a worn leather notebook. Corners curled, spine nearly broken. She flipped through it, past pages of recipes, inventory, sketches by the kids, until she stopped at one page marked by a blue thread. Then she began to read. February 17th. He came home drunk again. Not violent this time. Worse. Smiling, sweet, holding a broken locket he claimed he bought me. It wasn't mine, it had someone else's initials. Her voice didn't crack. I told him the girls needed shoes. He said love was more important than shoes. Then he left for 2 days. She flipped the page, March 2nd. The middle one asked why Daddy calls her the quiet one. I didn't know how to tell her it's because he doesn't remember her name. Another page, March 27th. I found a legal form in his coat pocket. Application for full custody, filed behind my back, no warning. Just his signature. "You're not stable," it said. "Unfit." That was the word, unfit. Jonas didn't move, didn't interrupt. He only watched. Mira kept going. April 4th. I taught Clara to lie today. Just one sentence. "He's not my father." She hated it. I hated it more. She closed the book then, set it down gently, not to silence the words, just to let them breathe. Jonas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "How long?" 3 years of silence, 1 year of running, 6 months of believing I was finally allowed to exist. He reached out, pushed the book slightly closer to himself. "Why didn't you put his name on the birth records?" Mira looked at the fire. "Because truth isn't always safe, and names carry weight. Legally, he has the right to file." "I know." Jonas didn't speak for a while, then, "You want to stay and fight?" Mira gave a small laugh, bitter, dry. "I want to wake up one day and not have to explain why I protected my children." She tapped the book. "That's why I kept this. So if one day they ask me why I lied, I can show them it was the only way to tell the truth." Jonas nodded. He stood, took the notebook in his hands, and held it like something sacred. Not because it was precious, but because it had survived. "I know someone in county records," he said. "If this ever needs to speak louder, it will." Mira didn't thank him. Not out loud, but her hand, resting lightly on the table, brushed against his. She didn't pull it away. Outside, the wind shifted direction. Inside, something else shifted too. Not quite peace, not yet, but a beginning. The envelope this time was heavier. Cream-colored paper. Red seal. Delivered by a county deputy who didn't know anyone's name, just followed orders. He left without stepping off his horse. Jonas found it wedged in the gate just after sunrise. The wind had pushed it sideways, as if even nature wanted to keep its distance. He didn't open it. He brought it inside. Mira was feeding the fire, her back to the door. The girls were still upstairs, the sound of their footsteps muffled in blankets. Jonas set the envelope on the table. Mira didn't turn. "I heard the hooves," she said. "Is it him again?" "No." "Worse?" He didn't answer. She faced him now. Her eyes dropped to the envelope. Her jaw tightened. Jonas nodded once. "It's official now," he said. "County seal, courier by uniform." She crossed the room, picked it up, broke the seal without ceremony, pulled out the document, read in silence. 1 page, then 2, then 3. At the bottom of the second sheet, a line stood out in bold. "Formal request for parental competency evaluation, as permitted under revised statute 19.3b. She reread it twice, then folded the pages carefully and set them down. Jonas waited. Finally, she spoke. "So now I get to prove I'm human, to people who've never met my children." Jonas approached slowly. "We can respond, file a stay, challenge the grounds." "He knows what he's doing," Mira said. "He doesn't need to win the case, he just needs to plant enough doubt." Micah walked in, rubbing his eyes, saw the papers, paused. "Is that the court?" Mira glanced at him, then forced a smile. "No, honey, just boring grown-up mail." Micah didn't push. He walked over, sat by the stove, and began tying the laces on his boots. Jonas watched him a moment before turning back to Mira. "Are you okay?" She exhaled. "I've been through worse." That's not the same as being ready. I've never been ready, she said, but I keep showing up. She picked up the notice again, scanned the appointment date. County House, Thursday, 10 a.m. That's in 3 days. I know. They'll ask about stability, schooling, finances. I know. They'll ask about Elias. She looked up, and I'll have to lie without lying. Jonas frowned. What do you mean? I'll have to make him sound harmless, just absent. If I say too much, I'll sound angry. Angry mothers don't win custody. Jonas's voice was quiet now. You shouldn't have to edit your pain. She shrugged. It's not about pain. It's about credibility. She stepped to the sink, rinsed her hands, dried them on the edge of her dress. Jonas leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. We could get someone, he said, a legal voice, even just advice. I don't want to drag this further. He already did. Mira paused. Then, you know what they'll see, right? A woman with no job, no permanent address, living with a man she's not married to. They'll also see 5 girls who are warm, fed, and safe. Mira gave a dry laugh. They'll see what Elias tells them to. Micah's voice came softly from the stove. He wasn't looking at them. They'll see that we're loved, he said. Mira turned, surprised. He still wasn't looking, but his hands were folded now, still, certain. And Mira, for the first time that morning, sat down. She didn't say anything for a while, neither did Jonas. Then she reached for the journal, not to read from it, just to hold like armor. Micah waited until everyone had gone to bed. The house breathed slow in the dark, a few creaks from the roof, a mouse scratching in the wall, nothing urgent, nothing new. He sat at the kitchen table with a stubby pencil and a folded sheet of paper. No lines, just space. He looked around once more, made sure no one was watching, then hunched over and began to write. To the judge, I don't know how this works, but I want to tell you something. He paused, erased the last line, started again. My name is Micah. I'm not her real son, but she takes care of me anyway. She makes oatmeal even when there's only salt. She fixes buttons. She knows how to stop the girls from crying without yelling. I don't know where my real mom is. I don't remember her smell. But I remember what scared me. And Mira is the only person who never looked scared when I was scared. Micah blinked hard. The pencil tip broke slightly. He turned the page over, started again. I live here now, with them. I chop wood. I don't complain, I try to help, but I can't vote. I can't go to court, so this letter is all I can do. I just want the judge to know that if you take them away from her, it's not her who will be hurt most, it's us. He stared at the words, then crossed them out. Too emotional, too much, too childish. He folded the paper once, twice, then ripped it down the middle. Each tear felt louder than it should have. He stuffed the pieces into the stove ashes, buried them under yesterday's coals. Then he sat back, hands shaking, not from cold, from the ache of wanting to matter and not knowing how. Upstairs, one of the girls murmured in her sleep. Mira turned in her bed. Jonas shifted on the bench. None of them stirred. Micah stood, moved to the window, looked out into the dark. The stars looked like holes punched through heavy cloth. He whispered to them, not words, just breath. Then he walked quietly back to his corner, pulled the blanket up to his chin and stared at the ceiling until morning came. It was the kind of night that didn't feel like night. The clock ticked, slow and stubborn. The fire had gone quiet, only coals now, no wind, no owls. Even the trees outside seemed to hold still. Jonas lay on the bench, eyes open, not restless, just awake. Across the room, Mira sat by the stove, knees pulled to her chest, her shawl wrapped tight. She hadn't spoken in hours. She hadn't cried either. That silence was worse. Jonas sat up quietly, pulling the wool blanket off his legs. He didn't speak, just walked over and draped it across her shoulders, gentle, like placing something on a windowsill. She didn't look up, but her fingers found the corner of the fabric and pulled it tighter. Jonas turned to walk away, then paused. "I never saw myself as a protector," he said softly. Mira looked over, one eyebrow raised as if asking, "Then what are you doing now?" "I used to fix things, iron, steel, objects that stayed where you left them." He looked down at his calloused hands. "I thought people were too soft, too complicated." He glanced at her. "But now, I think maybe that's the point." She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. Jonas nodded once and returned to his bench. He didn't lie down, just sat there, breathing. Above them the ladder creaked. Soft footsteps followed. It was Clara, barefoot, hair messy, dragging a folded cloth in her hands. She walked past Jonas without a word, stopped beside Mira, held out the cloth. Mira blinked. "What's that?" Clara didn't answer. She placed the bundle on Mira's lap and turned to go back up. Mira unfolded it slowly. Inside were Jonas's gloves, re-stitched, properly this time. The thread matched, the seams held, even the little tear on the palm had been reinforced. Mira looked across the room. "I didn't do this." Jonas stood again, walked over. He took the gloves from her hands, fingered the stitching, then smiled just slightly. "Clara's been practicing with the scrap cloth," Mira said. "She must have stayed up." Jonas looked toward the loft. The ladder was empty, but from above a small voice whispered, "They were torn, and I didn't like that." Mira closed her eyes, pressed her lips together. When she opened them, they were shining, but no tears fell. Jonas pulled the gloves on. Perfect fit. He flexed his hands. "Better than the factory," he said. Clara giggled from above, then slipped back into the blankets. Mira folded the blanket around herself again. "You gave me this," she said. He nodded. She looked at the gloves. "She gave you those. I think we're square." She smiled now, for real. Small, tired, but real. Jonas returned to his bench. Mira leaned back against the wall. For the first time in nights, her shoulders dropped, not in defeat, but in release. The coals in the stove pulsed red like a slow, steady heartbeat. Outside, the first breeze of morning touched the branches. Inside, no one spoke again. But no one felt alone, not anymore. The room was colder than it should have been, not because of the weather, spring had come and stayed, but because of the white walls, the polished chairs, and the clock that ticked just a little too loud. Mira sat at the table in the small hearing room, hands folded. She wore a plain blouse, no jewelry. Her shoes were clean but worn. Beside her sat Jonas, silent but steady, the weight of his presence like a wall against the world. Across from them, a court-appointed psychologist, two observers, and a clerk with a pad already half full before Mira said a word. The evaluator, a woman in her late 50s, adjusted her glasses and looked up. "Ms. Harrow, thank you for coming. We're here to assess your current capacity to provide safe, stable, and nurturing care to your dependents." Mira nodded once. No smile, no fear either. "We'll begin with your employment history," the evaluator continued. "I don't have one," Mira said. Jonas shifted slightly. The evaluator looked up, but didn't flinch. "I mean, not on paper," Mira added. "But I've managed food, medical care, education, conflict resolution, hygiene training, sleep schedules, and trauma regulation for 5 children under 10 daily." The room fell still. The clerk stopped writing. The evaluator glanced over her glasses. Mira reached down and placed the leather-bound notebook on the table. "This is my record," she said. "Your journal?" No, Mira replied. Their journal. Ours. She opened it to a page marked with a green ribbon. August 12th. Clara learned how to tie her boots today, said it made her feel official. Micah cut his finger chopping wood. I cleaned it, taught him how to wrap it. He said I should be a doctor. I said he should be more careful. Mira flipped a few pages. September 3rd. We shared one potato boiled. Kids still laughed. I made up a song about a one potato parade. Clara drew it in the corner. See the tiny flags? There was a crayon drawing. Messy, joyful. The evaluator leaned forward. Mira turned more pages. November 10th. It snowed through the roof. Jonas fixed the leak. I taught the girls how to layer socks. Micah gave Clara his only pair of mittens. She didn't give them back. A pause. Then she said, almost to herself, I didn't write this for you. The evaluator looked up. I wrote it so when they ask me one day why I stayed, I won't forget. Jonas's hands rested flat on the table. He didn't speak. The room held its breath. Then came the question. Ms. Harrow, do you believe that you alone can provide what your children need long-term? Mira looked the evaluator in the eye. No. That surprised them. She continued. But I believe that what I've already given them is the reason they'll survive the rest. The evaluator nodded. Do you have concerns about Mr. Quinn's involvement? I have memories, not accusations. Would you be willing to co-parent under supervision? Mira didn't answer right away. Then, I'd be willing to do what keeps them safe, even if it costs me peace. The evaluator looked at Jonas. You're not their father. No, ma'am. But you live with them. I do. Why? Jonas's answer was quiet. Because I've seen what it looks like when a woman holds a house together with thread and prayer. And I figured I could at least chop wood. Silence again. Then the evaluator said, We'll deliberate. You'll hear from us soon. She closed the file, but she didn't look away from the notebook. Mira stood slowly, picked up the journal, but left one page open on the table as she turned to leave. It read, March 18th. Clara lost a tooth. We buried it in the garden and planted a sunflower seed on top. I told her if something small falls away, something good can grow in its place. No one closed the book, not for a long time. The hearing had ended. Chairs were pushed back, notes were stacked. A clerk gathered files with the kind of calm that came from routine. The evaluator stood already discussing next steps with a staffer in the hall. No one noticed the boy at first. Micah stood in the doorway, fingers wrapped tightly around a folded sheet of thick paper. He didn't say anything, didn't look at his mother, or Jonas. He just stepped forward, straight toward the long table where all the adults had sat, and carefully placed the folded paper on top of Mira's open journal. The evaluator turned. Stopped talking mid-sentence. Micah didn't meet her eyes. He just said softly, This is mine. The woman blinked. I'm sorry. What is it? Micah pointed to the paper. You can read all the words you want, but this is what it feels like. Then he turned, walked back out. No fuss, no drama, just a boy in a sweater too big with shoelaces trailing behind him. The evaluator opened the paper. A drawing, crayon and charcoal. 5 figures stood in front of a small house. A woman in the center, hair wild, arms open, a boy with a crooked smile. A man by the fire holding an axe in one hand and a spoon in the other. 2 little girls holding hands barefoot in the grass. And in the sky, a tiny tree reaching up from the roof. There were words scrawled in the corner, written in shaky pencil. We're not perfect, but we're growing. Micah. The room stayed silent. The evaluator didn't say anything, but she gently folded the drawing, placed it back on the table, and didn't move for a very long time. The hallway outside the courthouse was too clean, too bright. Every footstep echoed longer than it should have. Mira stood by the window, her arms folded. She didn't look at Jonas or Micah. She didn't say anything. But she was breathing, really breathing. That was new. Jonas leaned against the wall, watching the light play across the marble floor. Micah sat quietly, still holding the empty envelope that had once carried the court's summons. He liked the weight of it now, as if it had turned into something they'd survived. Then came the voice, too loud for a hallway like this. "I gave her a way out. She didn't take it. That's on her." Mira didn't move, but Jonas's eyes snapped up. It was Elias, talking to someone on the phone, or pretending to. His coat draped over his shoulder, posture casual. Too casual. "She knew what I offered. A clean split, a monthly check, an apartment out of state. I didn't have to do that." He didn't see the court officer behind him. Didn't see the evaluator just exiting the hearing room behind the officer. He didn't even lower his voice. She could have disappeared quietly. No need for all this drama. Now Mira turned. She didn't step forward. She didn't raise her voice. She just said, "What did you say?" Elias blinked. His eyes met hers. And for a second, just a second, the mask slipped. "I said," he replied slowly, "that you made a choice. You had options." Mira took a step forward. "So you're admitting you tried to buy me off?" "I offered you a solution. Out of court. Out of mercy." The evaluator had stopped now, standing just behind the glass doors, listening. Elias noticed. Too late. Jonas stepped beside Mira now, not to confront, just to be seen. Elias adjusted his tie. "I was trying to protect the children," he said more carefully, "and a quiet solution benefits everyone." The court officer cleared his throat, loudly. Elias turned, saw them, and for the first time, didn't smile. The evaluator stepped through the door. "Mr. Quinn." "Yes? Could you come back inside for a moment?" Elias hesitated. "Is there something wrong?" "We just need a clarification on record," she said. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Elias followed. The doors closed behind him. Jonas let out a low exhale. Mira stood still, eyes locked on the glass. She didn't smile, but her shoulders shifted, as if something heavy had finally slipped off without her noticing. Micah came up beside her. "Was that important?" he asked. Mira placed a hand on his shoulder. "I think," she said, "he just told the truth for the first time." Jonas watched her closely. She wasn't triumphant. She wasn't relieved. She was real, grounded, worn but standing. And that, he thought, might be the most powerful thing anyone had seen all day. The courthouse was quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that comes not from absence of sound, but from the weight of people waiting to breathe. Jonas sat near the back, hat in his lap. Mira beside him, her back straight. Her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had turned white, but her face gave nothing away. Micah sat to her left, legs swinging slowly beneath the bench. The girls were at home. Clara had insisted on baking something in case we win, and Mira hadn't had the heart to tell her court didn't work like that. The judge entered without fanfare, older, measured, a face that had seen too much, and maybe that's why his tone was gentler than expected. "I've reviewed all materials," he said simply, voice even. "Testimonies, documentation, behavioral assessments, and most importantly, the space between the words." Mira didn't blink. He continued. "There is no perfect guardian. There is only presence, history, and a pattern of choice." He looked at Mira now. "Ms. Harrow, this court recognizes your role as the consistent primary caregiver of the minors in question. Custody remains with you, solely." Jonas saw Mira exhale. Barely. No gasp, no tears. Just that one breath, like the first air after staying underwater too long. The judge tapped his papers once. Mr. Quinn has been granted supervised visitation pending psychological review. Further adjustments will be based on the children's well-being. Elias didn't speak. He didn't argue. He simply stood, gathered his papers, and walked out without a word. Micah looked up at Mira. Her hands were still folded. He reached out, uncurled one finger, then another, then placed his hand in hers. She didn't move. Then slowly her fingers closed around his. Jonas watched it happen. No celebration, no cheering, just a woman, a boy, and a decision. Earned not by force, but by staying. He reached over, touched Mira's shoulder. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. Outside, the sun waited, and for the first time in weeks, no one rushed to leave. They simply sat there, holding on, together. The house smelled like cinnamon and ash. The oven was warm. The sink was full. The windows were cracked open just enough to let spring drift in on the back of sunlight and wind. Micah was at the sink, sleeves rolled, washing dishes like he meant it. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, guarding the oven door with a wooden spoon like it might escape. Jonas sat at the small table, thumbing through a broken radio he hadn't touched in weeks. Mira stood by the pantry, counting potatoes, mentally turning them into meals. Then came the voice, high, clear, certain. "Papa, can you help me?" They all paused. Even the wind seemed to. Little Elsie, the youngest, no taller than Jonas's knee, stood in the doorway, holding a tin too heavy for her arms. Her cheeks were dusted with flour, her eyes full of trust. Jonas looked up. Mira's head turned fast. For a split second, everyone in the room stopped breathing. Elsie didn't seem to notice. She shifted the tin in her arms again. "Papa?" Mira stepped forward, instinctive. "Sweetheart." But Jonas raised a hand, slow, not to silence her, just to say, "Let it be." He stood, walked over, and gently took the tin from Elsie's hands. He didn't say anything. She grinned. "I was strong until halfway. You were stronger than most all the way," he said softly. She beamed, ran off to Clara, who welcomed her with exaggerated bows and pretend trumpets. Mira watched him return to the table, watched the way his shoulders stayed relaxed, watched the way he didn't flinch. "I didn't teach her that," she said quietly. "I know. It's just something they say in books sometimes. Or when they see other kids." Jonas looked up. "You were going to stop her." "I didn't want her to think." He nodded. "I know, but don't." Mira stepped closer, sat down across from him. "You sure?" He looked down at his hands, calloused, burnt in places. The kind of hands made for hammer and coal, not lullabies. But he smiled. Not big, just enough. "I don't want to be anything I'm not," he said. "Then what are you?" He met her eyes. "Here." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. That was enough. Outside, a bird landed on the windowsill. Inside, the oven timer rang. Clara yelled, "Battle bread is ready!" And just like that, everyone moved again. Mira rose. Jonas stood. Micah grabbed forks. And Elsie, skipping between them all, pointed to Jonas and said to Clara, clear as day, "That's Papa. He helped me carry the heavy thing." No one corrected her, and no one ever would. The sun was folding behind the trees, casting long golden strips across the porch. Jonas stood on a small stool near the front beam. In his hands, a thick rope, knotted twice, steady. At the end of it, a woven basket, handmade like the last one, but sturdier, stronger. Mira watched from the steps, a quiet mug of tea in her hands. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Micah helped steady the stool. "Higher," Jonas murmured. Micah adjusted. Then Jonas tied the rope to the beam, pulled it twice to test the weight. The basket swayed gently in the breeze, light catching the rim, not empty. Inside, 4 small cloth pouches tied shut with twine, each marked in careful handwriting. Carrots, beans, wildflowers, sunflower seeds. He stepped down. Mira raised one eyebrow. So we're doing this again. Not the same way, he said. No baby this time. No rescue either. Micah looked between them. What is it for then? Jonas rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. For giving. Micah frowned. Seeds? Jonas nodded. You never know who walks by without enough. Sometimes people don't need a home, just a place to begin again. Mira sipped her tea. The old one was softer, she said. This one's ready for weather. They both looked up at it. It rocked gently, almost like it remembered something. Then Elsie ran out the door with a crayon drawing, waving it high. Put this in the basket, she shouted. What is it? Mira asked. A picture of our house, so they know who gave the seeds. Jonas chuckled. You want them to see us? No, Elsie said, very serious. I want them to see they're not alone. Micah helped her tuck the paper next to the sunflower pouch. Then they all sat on the steps, just watching the light fade. No one spoke for a while. Then Mira whispered, Do you remember the first one? Jonas nodded slowly. A blanket, a crying baby, a desperate note. And now? He looked at the basket. Now it's full of second chances. Mira rested her head lightly against his shoulder, not leaning, just touching. We don't have much, she said. No, Jonas agreed, but we've got enough to plant something. The porch grew quiet again. A bird landed on the edge of the basket, pecked once, flew off with a single sunflower seed. No one stopped it. The yard had changed. What used to be patches of brittle grass and half-dead thistle had become rows, uneven but hopeful, of green. Tiny shoots poked through the soil like shy promises. Some bent, some crooked, all alive. Micah knelt beside a planter box holding a trowel like a scalpel. He didn't dig, he sculpted. Next to him, Clara crouched with a watering can, her tongue poking out the side of her mouth in deep concentration. Only around the roots, she whispered, as if water could hear her. Behind them, Elsie dragged a stick through the dirt, humming a song she'd made up about dancing carrots. Jonas stood near the shed, hammering together a wooden trellis. His gloves were off, his sleeves rolled. There was a new stillness in him, not empty, just settled. Mira watched from the porch steps, holding her mending kit, not because anything was torn, but because the habit brought her peace. And peace now was allowed. Clara stood up suddenly. Mama, look! Mira looked. In Clara's hands, a small leaf shaped like a heart, perfectly green, glistening with dew. I didn't pick it, Clara said quickly. It fell, I swear. Mira smiled. Then maybe it was meant for you. Clara ran to tuck it into her journal. Elsie wandered to the side of the house where the porch met the old stone path. Someone, likely Micah, had left a piece of chalk there. She picked it up, looked at the empty board nailed to the shed wall, the one Jonas had sanded down last week, and slowly, carefully began to write. E-L-S-I-E. It wasn't straight, it wasn't neat, but it was hers. Clara joined her. Then Micah. One by one, their names appeared in pastel streaks across the board. Clara Micah, Sophie Jonas. They left space at the top. Elsie turned, chalk still in hand. Mama, she called, your turn. Mira hesitated, then stood, walked over. She took the chalk, wrote slowly, Mira. And beneath it, in smaller letters, she added, here. Micah smiled. Why here? She looked at him. Because for the first time, that's what I am. Elsie looked thoughtful, then turned back to the board and carefully added one more word under her name. growing. No one said anything after that. Jonas stepped over, ran his fingers along the edge of the board. A bit of pink chalk rubbed off on his thumb. He didn't wipe it away. The sun had risen higher now. Birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance the sound of a wagon wheel creaked along a dirt road, but no one looked away from the wall. The names remained, not carved in stone, not burned into wood, but written by hand, temporary, imperfect, and full of life, just like them. The table had dents, scratches, a burn mark near the edge where Clara once forgot a spoon on the stove. But tonight, it was set, mismatched plates, forks slightly bent, a chipped mug standing in for a cup, and yet everything felt aligned. Jonas ladled stew into bowls, thick with potato and carrot, a handful of herbs Mira had coaxed out of dry soil. Beside each dish, a slice of bread, dense but warm. Micah placed a jar of salt in the middle like it was treasure. "We didn't run out," he said proudly. Mira smiled. "It's not fancy." "But it's ours," Micah replied, pulling out a chair for Elsie. The girls climbed up, fidgeting and fixing napkins like royalty. Clara held her spoon with both hands. Sophie kept peeking at the bread like it might run away. Jonas sat last, across from Mira. They didn't toast, didn't say grace, but for a moment they just sat. No movement, no clatter, breathing in the scent of something made together. Then Mira broke the silence. "Let's eat while it's hot." Spoons moved. Bread was torn, not sliced. Laughter came, soft at first, then brighter when Elsie tried to blow on her stew and half of it splashed back onto her shirt. Jonas reached over, dabbed her chin with his sleeve. No one scolded, no one sighed, just a small giggle, and more bread passed down the line. Midway through, Micah looked around. "Has everyone eaten at the same time before?" Mira paused, then shook her head. "Not like this." "I like it," he said. "Feels full." Jonas nodded. "It is." They didn't talk about the past, didn't name the battles or the courtrooms or the sleepless nights. They just ate. And in the middle of the table, the oil lamp flickered against their faces, casting light not just on skin but on the spaces between them now filled in. After the last spoon was scraped, Clara asked, "Do we save the leftovers?" Mira nodded. "For tomorrow." "Then we have enough," she said, satisfied. Sophie reached across and took Mira's hand, without a word. Elsie followed, then Micah, then Jonas. No one told them to, it just happened. A ring of hands, mismatched sizes, rough palms and tiny fingers. A family, not by blood, but by choice. The children had gone to sleep full. No crying. No asking for extra blankets, just one by one, slipping under the quilts, small bodies wrapped in something safer than warmth. Certainty. Jonas was on the porch, fixing nothing, just sitting. The oil lamp above the door hummed softly. The light glowed golden against the wood siding, casting long lines across the porch rail. Mira stepped out quietly, a shawl around her shoulders. She didn't speak. He didn't need her to. After a moment, she sat beside him. They listened. To frogs somewhere out back, to wind in the trees, to the way peace makes a sound when you've lived long enough without it. Then Mira noticed something, a slip of paper tucked at the edge of the front door. She leaned forward, pulled it gently from beneath the frame. No envelope, just a folded note, creased twice, edges soft from wear. She opened it, recognized the handwriting immediately. Micah's, that half-print, half-cursive, in-between style of a boy trying to write like a man, inside just a single line. The Callan family, Enough. That was all. No signature, no explanation, just those words. She stared at them for longer than she expected. Then she smiled. Not wide, not quick. but the kind of smile that starts in the chest and rises like warmth from a hearth. Jonas glanced over. "What is it?" She handed it to him. He read it once, then again, then nodded slowly like the sentence had landed in a part of him he hadn't named yet. He folded the paper and tucked it into his breast pocket. Didn't say anything more, didn't need to. The light above flickered but didn't go out. Inside, the soft shuffle of Clara turning in her sleep. Elsie mumbled something about carrots. Micah exhaled like someone who finally let go of something they'd been gripping too long. Mira looked at the house, not large, not polished. But it had held them, held all of them. And for the first time in her life, the word home didn't feel borrowed. It fit. Jonas stood, checked the porch light, made sure it had enough oil to burn till morning. Mira watched him do it. "Why do you always leave it on?" she asked gently. He shrugged. "Some habits are hard to break." She tilted her head. "Still waiting for someone?" He paused, then looked at her. "No," he said. "Just making sure no one else ever has to wait in the dark." She said nothing, just reached over, touched his hand, and for a while they sat like that, not thinking ahead, not looking back, just being still. With the light, and the house, and the name Callan, finally belonging to something more than one man. It now meant a table with 6 chairs, a wall with chalk names, a basket with seeds, and a porch light that didn't ask questions, only stayed on. Just in case someone somewhere needed to know, this place is still open, and that yes, it is enough.